Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's weekly Thrive in China roundtable. Today, we're going to be talking about 6 ways to do business with China without actually establishing an entity or a company there. Something that is an extremely hot topic for those of you that aren't yet ready to take the risk and the commitment to actually establish something in China. Before we start, I just want to highlight how the roundtable works. We're here to teach you. Sometimes we'll ask you guys questions. Please use the chat box if you're showing up live. If you're not and you're watching this on replay, then don't hesitate to set up a one-to-one with me if you've got any questions or doubts. We're here to answer all the questions that come in live. And obviously, if you're watching this on replay, we're also available. We are planning to set up a weekly Thrive in China WeChat group, where if you are watching this on replay, you can then ask your questions in this group as well. Remember, this is your time spent. Use it wisely. From a technical standpoint, we're using Zoom meetings. So if you run into any technical issues, just log off, log back in. If anything happens on my side, it usually takes a minute or two for me to reboot, and then I'll come back on. So the expert for the week is myself. My name is Kristina Koehler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I've got 17 years of experience in corporate services and compliance in China. What does that mean? We offer solutions like pre-investment advisory. We do trademark registrations. We incorporate companies in China as well as in Hong Kong. We offer a full outsourcing solution of accounting, tax, payroll functions. And we offer cross-border e-commerce mentorship solutions, as well as non-executive director solutions as well. If you're interested in any of our services, don't hesitate to reach out. I'll be happy to explain further. We help clients at all aspects of their China journey, whether it's in the pre-investment stage, whether it's at the point of getting interest and orders, or all the way further along to actually incorporating their subsidiaries and then focusing on the growth and scaling up in the market. If you haven't read our ebook, The 10 Biggest Mistakes Companies Make in China, just email me and I'll send you a PDF copy of it at Kristina@woodburnglobal.com. It highlights pretty much the 10 biggest mistakes I've made or where I've seen clients make. And it's just a nice book where it gives you a checklist of what you as a leader, as an entrepreneur, should probably not be doing in China. So let's get cracking. It's 6 ways to do business in China without setting up an entity or an office. And ultimately, I start off with this presentation usually asking, what are your goals for China? Obviously, the primary goal is to make money by selling into China, having people on the ground in China to support the business and help you to scale up, being able to invoice locally and issue fapiaos. Those are usually the top 3 reasons and trigger points for companies to say, we need now an entity in China. Now, if you've got other goals and objectives, I'd love to know what they are. You know, what would you like to achieve in the Chinese market, both in the short term and in the long term? Now that we've looked at the goals and objectives, let's look at the frustrations that you might be having for the China market entry. You simply don't know what options exist for market entry. You don't know what you can and cannot do. And let's make it very clear, how you will enter the Chinese market may be very different than how you enter the UK market, German market, US market, etc. This is a big one. There's zero alignment amongst the decision makers on how to achieve those goals and objectives. That can be extremely frustrating and can ultimately hold back the business from market entry into China. What I mean by zero alignment is that you might have a board of directors and one person wants to do X, the other person wants to do Y, the other person wants to do Z, another person wants to do an accumulation of all 3. So it does get a bit complicated, right? And there's no one decision maker saying, I want to do X, Y, Z, let's do this and let's execute and implement. The other is fear of market entry. What happens if we make a mistake? What happens if we lose all of this investment capital, right? A very common one as well, which also obviously then leads to not having enough financial resources to make the big commitment to actually go into China, establish an entity in China. And the other is having no idea on how to move from a fantastic strategy where you've put pen to paper, you can see what that is going to look like, what's the business plan, the budget, but then you're missing the execution part. You don't have anybody to execute, you're frustrated because you need people on the ground or third parties to help you to then execute. If you've got any other frustrations that I should be adding onto this list, let me know and I will add them on. So we've started today looking at the goals you want to achieve and the frustrations that you're encountering, okay? Well, let's talk about the 6 business models that you can create from your own home jurisdiction without actually setting up an entity in China that will help you to execute and kick off your strategy. Option 1 is direct sales, okay? Direct sales means you've got your own website in the UK, in Germany, in wherever, and you want to instill e-commerce on there. And I have talked to hundreds of brands that actually have attracted Chinese consumers solely through their website at home, which maybe they translated into Mandarin, whatever the case is. They've been able to build up their brand image, and they're just using their own website as their landing page for people to purchase goods and to start selling, okay? Now, obviously, you have to do more in order to really get those Chinese consumers that are in China. With the brands that I've spoken to that utilize this model, they're predominantly attracting Chinese consumers that are residing or are visiting outside of China, so in their home country or within the EU or within the UK, right? If you really want to expand on that, my tip today will be focus on the marketing in China and provide that landing page with the understanding that it is obviously not optimal for Chinese consumers to get onto non-in-house, in-country hosted websites, okay? But you can do advertising through content marketing, influencer marketing, social media, advertising, etc. Okay, that's one solution. Direct e-commerce through your own website. The other one is obviously then cross-border e-commerce. So you are setting up flagship stores on the e-commerce platforms in China, and you are then, from a logistical and supply chain standpoint, working with logistics providers to warehouse your goods and to do the delivery to the consumers as well. Okay, easy. Cost is the setting up of a flagship store. You will need to work with a TP who runs that flagship store, and you'll have to work with a logistics provider that picks up the goods, warehouses it, does the whole freight forwarding, clears customs, and brings it to the consumer. But another thing where you don't have to set up an entity in China, you also don't have to do product registrations for this. The next is direct B2B sales with customers generated from the home office. So you've got customers who you have acquired probably through trade shows or through a network or through referrals, and they're being directly serviced from your home office. Okay, so it's direct B2B sales. So in terms of direct sales, we've been looking at e-commerce, right? Direct from your own website. We've been looking at cross-border e-commerce and direct B2B sales. Okay, where you're not setting up an entity in China, it's the minimum amount of risk. Even for B2B sales, you might be working with distributors, which is actually a second point, but you could also eliminate those distributors and go directly to the customers yourself. All right, option 2 is using trade intermediaries. Okay, so what does trade intermediaries mean? It means ultimately, what are your sales channels that you're looking to investigate as you're selling into China? So you might have a sales representative or sales agent, and usually these people can help you to open your doors, especially if you're an unknown brand. They might set up research studies, test your product, get feedback about your product. They may invest heavily into the market. The difference between a sales representative and a distributor is that a sales representative will not take on the ownership of the goods that you are trying to sell into the market. They are just there representing your brand and trying to gain a network on that, okay? The actual sales would still be B2B direct, okay? So it's option one, direct sales, directly from your home office to the customers, but you've got a sales agent on the ground in China who is helping to facilitate you to meet new people, network, get new customers, new end customers, right? This would really be for the B2B market. Distributors. Now, distributors tend to take on more risk. Why? Because they want a larger share of the revenue. So if you're looking at what their commission percentages are or the margins that they're making, they're going to be earning more. But obviously, in return, they're going to take on the ownership of the products, and they're going to manage the full end delivery to the consumers, deal with the returns of products, marketing costs, etc. Okay, they're going to actually be, if you like to think about it, your subsidiary in China, except you don't own that subsidiary, the distributors do. Okay. And the disadvantage is that you're not the only brand that they're working with. They will be working with multiple brands. And they've created a system process that works to get known from a marketing perspective, to then sell. And they potentially might manage not just B2B sales direct from the distributor to other distributors or retailers, but they may even manage your e-commerce platforms. Okay. And it's a matter of knowing who those distributors are and who would be good fit for you. Media agencies. Now, again, you can still do B2B sales, but use media agencies in China that push online and offline campaigns so that you can generate more revenue. For example, you might want to use a media agency for 11/11, which is the Chinese Valentine's Day on the 11th of November. To really push revenue, really push sales, but you won't be using them for the supply chain or anything like that. They're just really pushing these marketing campaigns, okay? Now, some of these media agencies might offer additional services. You've got companies out there that are going to be multifunctional, and it's a matter of understanding whether you want to put all your eggs in one basket and work with these types of companies, or whether you want to segregate it and media agency would only do the marketing campaigns and marketing functions. Then you've got TPs, which stands for Team All Partner, but means much more today because TPs are actually the facilitators for your e-commerce. They can set up the flagship stores on your behalf. They can also be the back-end owners of those flagship stores. They can handle the full fulfillment order between consumers, logistics providers. They're offering literally a one-stop shop solution for you to do the cross-border e-commerce, okay? Generally, TPs will charge in 3 different ways. One is a fixed monthly service, a commission based on sales, or a mix of one of the two. And that's then a negotiation point. You might find that TPs also offer you can also act as a media agency and offer you marketing solutions, connections to KOLs, which are the key online influencers, etc. But TPs, ultimately, it's the equivalent of thinking of them as the online distributors, okay? Where they're going to manage your e-commerce stores, manage the inventory, manage the whole order flow, etc. Again, you're not setting up an entity, you're outsourcing all of these functions. You're using these trade intermediaries to really push off and scale up the business in China. You can also use service invoicing agents. So if you're actually a company that offers services in China, so not trading in products, there are companies that act as service invoicing agents because the customers that are acquiring the services from you want to pay in renminbi and receive a fapiao. So you might have to use a third party on the ground that acts as an intermediary to actually issue fapiaos on your behalf and do the money flow and invoicing then with your customers in China. A lot of you may not even know that this type of service exists. It does. Again, not for products, because that would be distributors and whatnot, but this is ultimately for services. So that's using, so we started off today, option 1, looking at direct sales. Option 2 is actually using trade intermediaries. The third option is using licensees, right? And licensing is a great way to do business in China, where you don't have a plan to physically expand, and you're using licensors to actually build your product, build your brand name, manage the technology side of the business. When you're working with licensees, think about what you will be licensing, what type of products, what type of brand, what control will you be relinquishing to them? And is that important? Are you scared about the image if they don't do a good job? What will you continue to control, right? Now, licensees generally in China, if you work with some of the bigger names, they, again, similar to distributors, have a system process and an ideal formula on how to take a brand, license it, and sell products and do things in China. If you work with the smaller ones, they might not have that key formula, but you might be paying them less to them in terms of commissions and whatnot. Option 4 is using franchisees. Not overly utilized. It's really for the fast food market and other types of sectors. But basically, you are allowing a company in China to buy into the existing model that you've created, the brand name, the operations, the marketing, the recipes, etc., and giving them the control over that. Again, it's important to know how much control you're relinquishing and how much control you want to retain, and having then bulletproof contracts to support that. Option 5 is using an employer of record service. So it could very well be that you want to use option 1, which is direct sales, but you don't want to use trade intermediaries because they're never going to focus 100% on your brand. You may not want to use licensees. You may not want to franchise, but you actually want to hire somebody on the ground or expatriate somebody to China that will work full time for you in terms of promoting the business. But remember, you're still not, you don't have that high commitment level to actually establish an entity on the ground. So you can use an employer of record service, which is ultimately a professional employment organization who hires these employees on your behalf, making sure that their payroll is compliant and their labor relationship is compliant in China. Now, if you hire mainland Chinese employees that are residing in mainland China, they've got to pay personal income tax and social insurance, all right? If you hire foreign employees that are residing in mainland China, then you need to obtain work permits, residence visas, and you do need a company to sponsor them. But they also have to pay personal income tax and social insurance. So if you are not prepared to set up your own company in China, you have to utilize a third party to help you facilitate that whole payroll and employment aspect, all right? Now, why would you use an employer of record service? Generally, it's because you just prefer to have somebody who works for you full time and is executing the company strategy on your behalf on the ground, okay? They're gonna join client meetings, they're gonna do sales support, they're gonna be part of the supply management, etc. The other is that as you are not ready to commit to the market, you may have to do a lot of research and testing. And instead of outsourcing that to a market research company, you may wanna hire a local staff who does the whole market exploration and marketing activities to really see what the feedback and resonance is regarding your brand. You may also be on a contractor basis with clients in China, where the company overseas is contracting a certain skill set into country for a limited period of time, and you need somebody to hire those people. Another is you're gearing to go, you want to set up a company. It does take about 6 months, but you don't want to lose out on this employee or this person you found, and you need somebody to hire them in the meantime. Now, the disadvantages of using an employer of record service is that the employee's sense of belonging will not be the best because the client has no local entity. What this means is that you're not giving stability to the employee, right? The employee wants to know that when they join your company, it's going to be for a long-term commitment, not that they change jobs 1 year after the next. So of course, if you're using an intermediary to hire them, this does not give them a sense of stability. So it's important at the onboarding to tell them when they reach certain KPIs and certain triggers that you will then go ahead and establish a company in China. You might find that it's not easy to hire employees because again, the employees want the stability, right? You may find also that the PO, the professional employment organization, is just based in one city and they don't have a branch office in another city where you actually want to hire somebody. And because of the social insurance regulations today, you can't work with them. So it might make it very difficult to actually do the employment. The employment contract will follow obviously the HR guidelines of the service provider, the professional employment organization versus the client. So again, you do want to have some form of flexibility that you can amend that employment contract to your needs, but remember, they still have to be PRC compliant, okay? Another thing is that for many people, especially if you're doing contractor work in China, is that the employment contract term cannot be lower than 1 year. And maybe you only want to test out the market for 6 months. So it does get a bit tricky in terms of part-time workers, in terms of freelancers, etc., because you do have to have this 1 year commitment. But the advantages are great, you know, and so simple. It's fast market entry into China. You have a legal and HR team in China that does the payroll services. They will manage the employee onboarding in terms of the legalities and tax and social insurance aspects. It will help you to stay compliant because you know you're employing somebody properly. And ultimately, it's cost savings for your market entry because, you know, you're not paying out commissions to third parties. You're paying a fixed salary. It's easy to budget and a small service fee for then the company to hire these individuals. This is sort of what it looks like with the employee of record. And I'm going into a little bit greater detail here on this because sometimes people don't understand the concept. But you've got a three-way relationship with the employee, the client, and the employer of record. And you've got, you know, service agreement, operating employer, and then administration employer. And it's a co-working relationship ultimately. Option 6, and the final option, is using Hong Kong as your Asian sales hub. Now, I know that the spiel has been 6 ways to not establish an entity or an office in China, but I do want to highlight that a lot of people do set up Asian sales hubs in Hong Kong that cater then to the Chinese market. It is a easier solution because you're going into a jurisdiction that is based on common law. So it follows sort of the British standard common law system versus the Chinese government regulations, which can be quite strict, rigid, stringent, and can take a lot of time. Setting up in Hong Kong can take a very short period of time. Obviously, what is longer is the bank account opening. But ultimately, what you could do is set up this Hong Kong company that not only takes care of China, but also of other APAC countries. So if your goal and objective, and this is why I say it's really important to outline what your goals and objectives are. If your goal is not only China, but it's APAC in general, then Hong Kong is a perfect location and jurisdiction to set up the entity versus doing that in China, okay? So obviously the goals and objectives here are very, very different than the first 5 options, but I did want to highlight it because there are instances where companies have these types of goals and objectives. And the frustration is, oh, why do we need to have a Chinese entity? Because, you know, we want to go to Japan, Korea, Australia, and all of that. And doing that out of China just gets complicated with the inventory flow, etc. Hong Kong is a perfect solution that can overcome that. So obviously, Hong Kong offers you an Asian presence. It gives you bank credit from the banks. It's a much more mature banking system. Communication, it's all within the same time zones. Lower taxes than in China. It gives you a certain prestige level because it's more considered more of a westernized country. You can keep inventory on the ground in Hong Kong. There's no duty, no customs duty. So you've got warehousing facilities, delivery times. Hong Kong is considered an international market with also local currency renminbi options as well. So just to recap the summary of all the options. Option 1 is direct sales. And again, you've got e-commerce from your head office, cross-border e-commerce, or the third is direct B2B sales. Option 2 is using trade intermediaries like sales agents, distributors, TPs to help facilitate your sales in the market. And the question there is, what are these trade intermediaries actually doing for you? What is their responsibility checklist? You can use licensees, you can use franchisees, you can use an employer of record service if you don't want to use any intermediary at all, but you want to hire somebody yourself who will work full-time for you. And the sixth option is using Hong Kong as your Asian sales hub, where potentially China is not the only market that you wanted to get into. It's just one of several markets you want to get into. So I would love to know what was your biggest takeaway from today. I would also love to know if you knew about all of these options that existed. Again, this is a lot about strategic planning, knowing what business models you can create and what you can do, and then looking at the pros and cons of each of those. And obviously we help with those types of tailor-made solutions, but do let me know what was your biggest takeaway from today. And if you're watching it on replay, don't forget to message me as well on that. How you can work with me is we help to validate China market entry strategies, looking at the business models, looking at the pros and cons. We look at the incorporation advisory. We actually execute incorporations in China. We do competitor business scope benchmarkings. We can appoint supervisors, finance managers, non-executive directors. We also offer a solution now, which is called the China Business Mentor, which is specific for cross-border e-commerce. We offer tax advisory, recruitment, and we offer also outsourcing solutions for accounting, tax, and payroll. Any questions on that? Again, don't hesitate to email me. You can email me at Kristina@woodburnglobal.com if you want more information. So that was the end of today's roundtable. And if you do have any questions, pop them into the chat box. Just to keep you updated, we have events coming up. Next week, we're going to be talking about how to vet potential business partners. And I think this flows really nicely because, as you can see from the 6 options, you will always be appointing somebody to help you grow and scale your business. In all of the options, except 2, which is, well, yeah, 2, the e-commerce site is in your home office or you're doing B2B sales direct. You won't need to use third parties, but you need to know how to vet these third parties, how to do your due diligence on them, how to know whether they're the right fit for your company. Then we're going to be talking about how to register your trademark. And then June 8th is a tentative date set for a guest speaker who's going to be talking about developing apps in China, which is a great sales technique as well. We're going to be looking at brand mascots, establishing your brand on Chinese e-commerce platforms, and effective China PR in the digital climate. And we're in the process of evaluating our July topics as well. If you do have any topics that you want us to touch on, again, email us and either I will create a presentation around it or find a guest speaker who is relevant on that. So I do want to thank you all for joining me. It was a very short and sweet presentation today. Again, I will be on if you have questions. I'll stop the recording prior to that. But again, if you've got questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you all so much for listening in. Take care and goodbye.